Good evening and welcome to Overtime here on WOTM. I'm Gerhard MATHANGANI, joined by Mark Everett Kelly. And Mark does a really great job of really crunching the numbers. He has a large background in history as well as statistics. And we'll break down some of the big games this weekend. He'll do so kind of with a separate little look at it. And it'll be really interesting for those who are Alabama fans, Auburn fans, and fans of college football in general. We'll also talk a little NFL a little bit later. We'll first start with the matchup between Auburn and Penn State. This is a big one for the Auburn Tigers. Before we go into the numbers, how do you see this game kind of playing out overall? And we'll look into Bo Nix and some of the more specific things here in a bit.
It's going to be nice to see Auburn getting a real test.
Yeah.
And Penn State is a real test. When they beat Wisconsin in week 1, people didn't know whether or not they got over last year where they got up to that awful start.
Right.
Where they lost like 4 or 5 games to start the year. And they were supposed to be in contention for the Big Ten last year. If you remember 2 years ago, they were right in it till the very end, losing out of Ohio State in 2019. So people expected a lot out of Penn State last year. And I think coming into this year, they were a team that most people thought they didn't know what to expect because of the inconsistency shown last year.
Right.
Franklin is one of the better young coaches out there. We know now that he's even getting rumored to be going to USC.
Right.
Gives you an idea of how good of a coach he is. And Penn State, ever since the paternal thing and all of that nightmare that happened under his watch, has been a little bit of an unknown and a little bit of a forgotten cause.
Right.
And remember, Happy Valley was once the place to be for college football. So for Auburn to go in there, if they can beat them there, number one, you have an SEC team beating a Big Ten team, which is always nice for the conference.
Right.
Number two, they're doing it on the road. Auburn always has struggled against ranked teams on the road. They usually don't win against ranked teams on the road. They're just maybe a mind block compared to at home, where at home they play teams a lot tougher.
Right.
And especially this team with Harsin, this would be a real kind of statement win for him against a ranked team on the road when no one really, I don't think, expects outside of Alabama for Auburn to win this game. It'd be nice to see them with a like I said, a statement win for the school that's looking for an identity outside of what they were last couple years.
And both teams that really are looking for that is one of those things that Penn State can really hang their hat on the SEC. Meanwhile, Auburn can hang its hat on a road game.
Yep.
Against a power school in the top 10 right now.
Yep.
Auburn offensively is doing a really good job, and one of the things you broke down is their offense as a comparison to the rest of the SEC. And you put up 62 and 61 points in the first couple of games. It really leads to a dynamic offense that's making explosive plays.
And this is the first time since, I believe, 1932 that they have 60 points in back-to-back games. Now, again, these numbers aren't going to last.
Right.
I don't anticipate Auburn being at the top of the SEC when you have Alabama, Ole Miss, some dynamic offenses, even Florida, maybe Georgia, teams that can really score. Once they enter into conference play.
Right.
Going against two kind of nobodies with Akron, with the lost, I think, 22 out of 23 at one point, and Alabama State, I think maybe they haven't faced a real test yet.
Right.
But they're running the ball well with Bixby and Jarquez Hunter are really showing, they have, each of them have over 240 yards rushing in the first 2 games. They're averaging almost 10 yards a carry, which is unheard of. Even I don't care who you're playing.
Right.
That's impressive. So how are they going to be able to run the ball against Penn State, which has a pretty good defense? If they're in the Big Ten that they love stuffing the run. So if they can run the ball against Penn State, that'll be a good idea of what they can do against some of the better defenses in the SEC.
Exactly. Meanwhile, Bo Nix has garnered a lot of hype, and he's a known commodity around the country, especially after what he did his freshman season against Oregon. A lot of time has passed between those two. However, let's take a look at the numbers here that you broke down between his first 2 games last year and his first 2 games this year. And as you can tell, it's really dynamic what he's done this year, even though you kind of consider the opponents and kind of grading them on a curve.
Yeah, I think coming out of his freshman year, especially the way he played in that Alabama game, gave people reason to believe this guy is a quarterback we can count on for the future.
Right.
Last year, if you look at his road home numbers, they were drastically different. And even losing to teams like South Carolina last year at home, just something you don't do if you're one of the better quarterbacks in the SEC. And I think most people thought that Nix would take that step, maybe to not be up there with Mac Jones, but to be someone who, maybe like a Matt Corral or somebody who is building to be one of the best this year. So now you have Mike Bobo come in. They do a little bit more from behind center, and they're really doing a good job taking advantage of his strengths. They still use some of the run option stuff that he's really got adept at the last couple of years. 5 touchdown passes, no interceptions. The pass efficiency leads the SEC.
Right.
We're talking about, with Alabama's quarterback, their freshman quarterback supposed to be, up for a Heisman. Matt Corral, some big names, JT Daniels in the SEC. He has through 2 games the best numbers as far as pass efficiency, and most teams outside of Georgia have played also Rams these first 2 games.
Right.
So it's not like they're playing, world beaters. So that's pretty good for him to look at and say, this was a good confidence builder for him going into Penn State. Now we'll see against tougher competition if he really is ready to take that next step.
Exactly. We'll take a look and we'll do our predictions a little bit later on this game coming up later in our program. Another SEC West team that has a big game coming up in a couple of weeks. They played a big one last week is Arkansas. Arkansas played against Texas last week, and before we'll dive into the numbers about what they have coming up in just a little bit, but have you been surprised a little bit about what you've seen from the Razorbacks here from the first couple of games and really the first games in a real life, I would say, normal conditions under head coach Sam Pittman, even though he's in his second year?
Yeah, well, I think last year they were a surprise team, so most people didn't think that they would win a game, if any. Remember, they had that long losing streak entering the season coming into the in SEC play. So I think the way that they played last year gave some people an idea maybe they would be better than people thought this year. And one of those teams in the SEC West, like a Mississippi State, like Auburn even, that could be good, but we can't put them in the class of maybe a Texas A&M or even an LSU. We really don't know what LSU is going to give us this year, or an Ole Miss. They weren't in that class, but we knew that they could be good. Well, I think we saw they can be very good on Saturday, beating a Texas team that most people looked at and said, this team with the offensive coordinator coming over from Alabama, it looks like they were going to be one of the better teams in the Big 12, especially coming into Arkansas, an opponent they're used to because they were both members of the Southwest Conference back when it existed. So these are teams that had a history, and Arkansas lined up and they beat them physically to death.
Exactly.
They ran the ball for over 300 yards, the first time since 2016 that they ran for 300 yards against a ranked team. So that to me, it was the biggest identity factor for them, because Arkansas is going to need to be physical in the SEC if they want to compete.
Exactly. And one of the things about the Razorbacks is this week they'll have Georgia State, but in the next couple of weeks they'll start in SEC competition, and it ain't easy for the Razorbacks coming down the road. Break down what they have and maybe some of the streaks going into it.
Yeah, it's kind of welcome into the real world here. They get Texas A&M at home on September 25th. They've lost 9 straight to Texas A&M. Again, this was an Arkansas team that really struggled coming into last year. At Georgia, they've lost 2 straight, 8 of 9. Ole Miss, they won their last game, but they've lost 2 or 3 to them overall. And then Auburn, at home, they've lost 5 straight and 7 of 8. So games at Georgia, at Ole Miss, all these teams are ranked. 2 of them are in the top 10. Georgia's in the top 5. This is where they're really going to find out, are they for real? Can they be a team that can surprise in the West? Or are they going to kind of melt under some of this pressure after beating Texas and raising expectations a bunch?
Exactly. Arkansas and Ole Miss, to me, are the two teams in the SEC West that I think can make a lot of noise. And so far, they're doing so. So far, both teams are in the top 25.
I would put Auburn in that list too because
that's a good point.
Maybe not at the offensive capacity of Ole Miss,
right?
And certainly what we've seen for Arkansas. If Arkansas can run the ball for 300 yards against Texas, what can they do against some of these other teams?
Exactly. I think Auburn's answers will be this weekend. I think we saw something from Arkansas. We've seen something ish from Ole Miss. Let's see what Louisville actually is this year. But so far, I think Auburn needs to have that one test. They'll get it this Saturday. Well, speaking of this Saturday, another big game for Alabama coming up this week. They're also on the road. We'll discuss the Tide and the Gators next.